Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a Q&A with Mr. Paul Lauzon. Paul has been a successful financial advisor for over 41 years and is one of the founding members of Profitable Giving Canada, the self-regulatory non-profit for Canada's emerging fourth sector, including the organiser of the PGC and Justice Pharma Class Defence. Paul currently holds the position of Vice Chairman of Profitable Giving Canada and also the Chair of the PGC British Columbia Affairs Committee. Paul, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me. I know you are very busy at the moment with the class defence. Paul, for those few that don't know you, please would you start by telling us why people should follow your advice and how do you support the members of the class defence?
I think that there's a multifunctional aspect to that. I bring years of experience and expertise from the financial services industry, and which is a regulated industry. And I'm also have a lot of memberships and professional associations, and I have played various roles in the professional association. So I bring a lot of that background experience, 41 years of that, to the board. And I also assist the board in policy decisions and in feedback, and this is all in relation to defending donors, defending our industry, and defending taxpayers essentially as well. So when we're looking at PGC as a self-regulatory organization to regulate our industry going forward, it's important to bring that regulatory experience, but also the aspect of licensing and education and the need for expertise in that. So there's this broad background that I can bring to as a director, and that's why I guess I'm in that role at this point.
What are the greatest merits of the Profitable Giving Canada and Justice Pharma Class Defence?
Well, the greatest merits, I think, first of all, we're doing something that's never happened before. I think one of the greatest merits is the fact that we're crowdfunding. So this is the first time in history that the little people, the little person who cannot afford to defend themselves against this large megalith CRA is now able to do that. So for the price of a lawyer's letter, we're able to, the little guy is for the first time is able to have a multi-million-dollar defense and be able to go against the Goliath of CRA for the first time. The other aspect is that we have the power of the group, this idea of aggregating as a group to defend all four programs that no individual or even a small group can. So the group power makes possible the impossible. And the other side of it, as merits, we're going to win because of the evidence and because of the ability to crowdfund. But the other side of it is even people ask, well, what about the downside? What if you don't win? Well, even on the downside, the biggest downside we're going to be looking at is we would be able to have a waiver of interest and penalties, which is still a very, very big thing. But I don't even look at the aspect of a downside because we already know the evidence of the CRA or the assumptions of the CRA, and we know what our evidence is. So I think those are the biggest merits. A, for the price of a lawyer's letter, we're able to get a multi-billion-dollar defense. B, because of the crowdfunding, we're able to crowdfund not only the initial action, but even any kind of appeals that we would have to go at. And C, we got a great downside if there is a downside as far as that's concerned.
Why is it important for donors to purchase pharmaceuticals and settle their debt? And furthermore, why is this a condition set by Profitable Giving Canada in joining the class defence?
Well, it's important for donors to settle their debt because we have a contractual, the whole issue is not around whether the programs are legal or legitimate. Section 237.1 of the Income Tax Act clearly states that these are allowable programs. These are registered programs in the Income Tax Act that we can all participate in. It's a case of do we do them properly? And unlike previous programs, these programs are based on commercial law and commercial transactions. Similarly, the whole issue is around the aspect of the contract. So we have to complete our transactions to be compliant. So therefore, we have to complete these contracts. We have to pay off and that's by paying off the debt. The programs are solid, they are legal, they are legitimate. And what we're dealing with the problems is problems around corporate governance only, which is not nice, but it's fixable. And because they are fixable, we have solutions to that. Similarly with the CRA, their assumptions are based on the assumption, or their reassessment arguments are based on the assumption that we have no intention of completing our contracts. So it's a very simple thing to do. We just complete our contracts properly and compliantly, and there's only one way to do that, and that's through the justice solution. And the justice solution was created specifically for that purpose. So that's all we do. And then what that does is it validates our claims. But then it's another story. We have to defend those claims, unfortunately.
Thank you very much, Paul. Now, I understand that there were previous programs such as GLGI that were not successful in tax court. What is the difference between those programs and COIP, MLF, RLG, PGI that the class defense do represent?
The difference between the four COIP, RLG, Mission Life, PGI is that these programs are what we call open market structures. That means they get their authority under the Act, but they don't rely on provisions of the Act to generate the profits. Whereas former programs such as GLGI or CHT or Park Lane or whatever, these are known as gifting trusts. And these utilize provisions, like, for example, the gifting trusts utilize Section 107 of the Act, but they utilize provisions of the Act. So former programs prior to these open market structures, which is something in the evolutionary process, utilize provisions of the Act. And of course, CRA, which has no legal authority, does have administrative authority over the Act, and therein causes the problems, because then you're dealing in CRA's backyard, and you get into all kinds of issues. The other problem with GLGI is that there were no loans, there were no real contractual provisions in the same light as what these four programs are. So you're dealing with a whole different structure, and there are structural issues with regards to GLGI and some of these former programs in terms of valuations and so on and so forth. So we're talking two different things, like day and night. And that's what makes these four programs, COIP, RLG, Mission Life, and PGI, very, very strong and very, very defendable. Because the commercial transactions and the commercial law around it is fairly clear, as long as we complete those obligations.
Recently, many donors received a waiver from the CRA, and in that waiver, the CRA claim that no valid gift was made. Paul, is this true, and how does buying and donating pharmaceuticals for a second time help resolve this?
Well, it lies in what the donor will do going forward. First of all, the idea that there is no valid gift is garbage, because CRA's own audits of the programs and CRA's own audits of the charities, registered charities at the time, make this a false statement. CRA's audits have proven that the drugs were actually bought, that the drugs were actually sent to Africa and delivered through the charities to Africa. And so CRA's actions or lack of actions show this to be false as well. I mean, if this was true that there was no gift, CRA would not be messing around with us for years and years and years. They would have immediately confirmed their notice of reassessments on our objections. So it is a false statement. So it's not a question of gift here. It's a question of completion of the contract and compliant payment of the loan. So their assumption is that we have no intention of completing the contract and therefore no intention of paying the loan. Under Section 143(2)(7) of the Income Tax Act, any kind of loans for the purposes of donation must be full recourse, which means you must pay back 100% of the loan plus any outstanding interest. CRA's assumption is that we have no intention of paying off the loan, which would make it a non-recourse debt. Non-recourse is not allowed. Under integrated receivables and that terrible shenanigans, we're talking about limited recourse, which is also not allowable. So it's when you use the justice solution, which was designed not only to settle the contracts fully as full recourse, it also turns around and validates our claims against the CRA. So if a person does not settle the debt, if a person does not complete their contract, then CRA is correct. Because that person is elected to utilize what we call non-recourse debt, and then they lose. As long as a person completes the contract as they're supposed to and pays off the loan, then CRA is incorrect in the assumption. And that's what our whole justice solution and ensuing class defenses, everything is about, is proving that we've actually completed the contract as compliantly. Long answer, but there it is.
Many donors settled their debt with a third-party company called IRMI. Has IRMI closed? And if donors settled their debt with IRMI, why can't they join the PGC class defense?
Well, they're still around, and they're owned by the promoters. They are the promoters, and that's what's wrong with them primarily. They provide a non-compliant settlement because, first of all, it's limited recourse. Secondly, it's non-arm's length. Thirdly, they do not buy drugs or actually settle a debt. Payments are essentially paid to the wrong entities, and where they should be, honoring the contract and paying it to the proper entities, which would be the actual drug vendors who are actually holding the obligation in the coupons. Anybody dealing with integrated receivables have basically lost their money, and it still leaves those people fully exposed to the debt from the drug vendors. And they've just turned around, and unless they settle with justice, they've just destroyed their tax credits through non-compliant debt settlement as limited recourse.
For those that have not joined the class defense nor settled their debt, do donors have any other realistic options in protecting their tax credits, and are there any other risks?
They only have one option if they don't want to get hammered with the full amount of the debt and the CRA. CRA is only 1/3 the problem. The other 2/3 of the problem is the debt itself. And just because these people haven't come collecting, it's because they haven't been able to due to the end of the term of the loan. But that circumstance will soon change starting with this year. So the advice is very, very simply, they need to turn around and quickly settle with the justice solution and buy the drugs and have the drugs delivered properly to the drug vendors, and they need to join the class defense as quickly as possible. In that way, then they get to keep everything. Unfortunately, hopefully, then we might, as PGC, try to turn around and see if we can find some kind of recovery. But in the worst case or best case scenario, that money that's paid to IRMI could also be utilized as a credit against any interest that's outstanding. So that could actually be, the silver lining could be a little bit of helpful in terms of the full recourse debt aspect of it.
If donors want to join the class defense, but they've already paid back the CRA, what are their options?
The answer is yes. You have to understand there's two issues here. Again, one third of the issue is CRA is only 1/3 of the issue. The debt itself is the other 2/3. So regardless of whether you paid the CRA or not, you still have the debt obligation, and that debt obligation can destroy you. So if, for example, I owed $100,000, the CRA is $50,000. So I could pay $50,000, but that doesn't solve the $100,000 debt repayment, which I'm obligated under a full recourse. Full recourse also means that the lenders or the promoters can take full recourse against the lender, or against the borrower, I should say. So, but there's a couple things here. If you paid back the CRA, it depends whether you signed their waivers. If you signed a waiver, paid back the CRA and signed a waiver, that waiver is a waiver of your rights and civil rights and privileges. And so you need to. So what happens if you did that? Then you have actually torn up your notice of objections, and CRA can take immediate collection action against you. So if you did sign the waiver and pay it back to CRA, you still need to pay back the debts, but you're not going to be able to participate in the class defense. On the other hand, if you paid back to CRA but did not sign a waiver, that means your taxes are still in dispute, and you still need to settle the debt, of course. But then you can join the class and get all that tax back plus interest. But that's up to you. If you have paid back to CRA regardless, and your taxes are still in dispute, under Section 164.11 of the Income Tax Act, and there's a proper template letter that you can get off the PG's website, you can actually demand that tax back right now. In fact, you could demand that tax back that you paid as long as it's still under dispute, and you could even use that tax refund to help you settle your debt through justice. So we have people do various things. So again, a lot of that, and the answer to that question, is dependent on whether you got tricked by the deceit of the CRA into signing away your legal rights and freedoms.
For those that have received the CRA waiver, could you explain what the implications are if one signs it?
Well, again, as I mentioned before, these are waivers of your legal and civil rights. So CRA uses deceit, and in the meantime, what they're trying to do is collect as much as they can from the low-hanging fruit, using intimidation, using deceit, using people's fear and ignorance against them. And so what this does is when you sign that waiver, you sign away your legal and civil rights, so you cannot contest what happens, so that when you find out you've been duped by the CRA, then you have no recourse whatsoever against the CRA. That's their whole point. And so when you sign that waiver, you actually are tearing up your notice of objection. You are destroying your notice of objection, and that takes the taxes out of dispute, which means now the CRA can take full collection action, even though you are right, 100% right, and CRA is 100% wrong. They can take full collection against you, including all the illicit interest. We've actually found CRA is actually charging on this interest even more than what they're legally allowed to charge on the interest. And so by doing that, you have no defense against the actions of the CRA, which at this point have been outside the law, outside of the protocols, and so on and so forth. So it's a very, very serious thing when you sign these waivers. And it's something you just don't do haphazardly. A lot of people think that when they sign the waiver, they're just signing away waiving interest, but that's not the case. And so again, it virtually never ever sign a waiver from the CRA because of what that does. So hopefully that answers the question.
Obviously, this is a complicated situation, and many people are really confused with what to do and what their options are. There's the advice of the original tax shelter agent, the CRA, now different entities advising different options. What's your advice to the donors?
Well, there's a lot of problems with the confusion. So first of all, I think that the big thing that with donors have, I mean, they have a lot of anger, and they should have, because of what we've been basically abandoned by the promoters. It's the promoters that have decided to get greedy, and what we're dealing with here is a breach of corporate governance. So there's a lot of confusion, and there's four sources of this confusion, and it's no wonder that people don't know what they're doing, whether they're coming or going. They have no idea what's coming at them. And these four sources of confusion, come from the promoters, come from the CRA, come from former agents, and come from their advisors, which are whether they're lawyers or accountants or what have you. So one of the most important aspects of the seminar is that people can come and they can sort this confusion out, because they get to understand what the sources of confusion are, what these people are saying that's wrong. They can get the facts. They can find out that there's only really two problems, and the problems basically related to the completion of the contract and CRA's assumptions based for disallowing the tax credits, and they can find out the solution. So what the most important thing is that they can sort out the deceptions from these four arenas that are meant to exploit people, and they can understand the problems, they can understand the solution, they can also understand the great carnage that's coming after them if they do nothing. I mean, it's tremendous carnage, because they're looking at 150% of their total debt that they're facing as in turnaround in terms of exposure. So it gives people this clarity, and it gives people this direction, and that's based on solid information and evidence that we have. And then not only that, it not only gives people a solution, but it gives people a way out and a defense, and they get to understand the defense, and they get to understand how we as a donor collective are working together as a group to defend each other, and to turn around and at the end of the day win the day and keep all of our tax refunds, keep all of our profits as was intended from the get-go, by doing the right thing, But how do you know what to do, or how do you know what the right thing is if you don't know what the problems are or the wrong things? And this way you get clarity. And I think the biggest thing is clarity and facts. And that's why everybody should be, if they haven't, they should be attending these. And we have people who have attended 5, 6, 7 of them because there's so much information that we present. We're so transparent and we give so much information. People need to come several times just getting all the information down. So it does give that clarity and sorts things out for people and gives them the direction. And that's the most important aspect, clarity and direction.
What makes Profitable Giving Canada different, and why should people trust the class defense?
I think it makes PGC different is that PGC is not part of the former agents. They're not part of the promoters. They're not, CRA. We're a separate organization. We're a not-for-profit. And the other side of it is, yes, it's natural for people to have this feeling of mistrust, because the most insidious thing about a breach of trust, and that's what we're talking about, is a breach of trust around the promoters, a breach of trust around the CRA, is that you don't know who to trust, including those who are there to genuinely help you. And that's why when I talk to people at seminars, I say, there's all these voices, and all these voices of confusion, which we just talked about, and all this mistrust. What you need to do is you need to listen to only one voice and one voice alone, and that's the voice of the contract. And it's in the PGC seminar that you listen to the voice of the contract, and that helps you sort out, who to trust and what to trust. And it's that clarity. So PGC has no financial interest. It's not a business. It's a not-for-profit, and those of us that are working at PGC, we're all volunteers. Nobody gets paid anything at PGC. So there's no financial interest for those of us at PGC. So I think that's the best you can do. And really, when you look at the problem and just look at the size of the problem, you've got to have a starting point. And I think that's a good starting point.
Even with all the information available and the advice of PGC, some people are not doing anything. They're being advised to wait and see what happens. What are the potential risks of doing nothing?
Well, if they're going to sit on the fence, they better start preparing their will, because this is so horrible. The carnage, you see, most people are doing that way because they really don't understand the carnage. We've had some suicides over integrated receivables already, and then the crap hasn't even hit the fan yet. And when people start getting the full frontal of not only the CRA, by doing nothing, you're getting the full impact of the CRA plus interest and penalties. You're looking at the full impact of the loan and loan collection. That's 150% of debt. And when people are looking at the average debt across the country is $100,000, that's a $150,000 hit that's coming at people. The amount of marriages that are going to be destroyed, the amount of suicides, the amount of bankruptcies are going to be staggering. I mean, we're talking 10 to 12,000 people that are affected by this, and we've only saved about 25% of the total. So when people take that attitude, I try to liken it to a person that is standing on the railway tracks with their back to a train, and the train is coming down at them full bore, and this huge train, and people saying, like, man, get off the tracks, you're going to get destroyed. And they said, well, I got to wait and just, it's probably an illusion. I'll wait until it hits me. Well, when the train hits you, it's too late to do anything. And similarly, when we go to court and you're not part of the class defense, it's too late. You're done. And you have to defend it yourself. And there's no way that you're going to be able to afford to defend it yourself. And if you haven't paid back the debt and the promoters have judgment against you, you have no more options. The promoters, the only options are left to the lender. So to wait until the bomb drops, and then try to extract yourself from that, it's too late. The bomb is dropped. You're blown to smithereens. So you need to get off the fence, and you need to get off very quickly, because we have little time left. This is not like it was 4 years ago when we started all this. We're now in the end game. We're moving forward right now as we speak with our class defense, and there's a point in time where there's not going to be any more people going to be able to sign on. And similarly, as we move into time and we get beyond the end of the terms of the loans, which is now just starting to happen over the next couple years here, people will not be able to perhaps even settle. And so the exposure becomes even more succinct and more severe. and that's the issue. They have to move, and they have to move now. There's no more time. And besides that, the costs are going up all the time and becoming more prohibitive.
Paul, thank you very much for your time today. You'll be able to find Paul's contact details at the end of this presentation for those that are not already members and need to join the Profitable Giving Canada and Justice Pharma class defence. Thank you for watching this video. We hope you found it informative and insightful. Thank you.